If you're wondering what am I doing here instead of Paris Costas, he's suffering from a terrible toothache after a root canal surgery, so he's speechless. So at the last minute, he asked me to moderate this very special evening. His unfortunate pain gives me this great honor and privilege to welcome some very special guests this evening. Sir Vidya Naipaul, Lady Naipaul, and Gillian Atkins, who is Sir Naipaul's literary agent. I find myself in a very unforgiving paradox this evening. To introduce a great writer is to detract from his stature. Sir Vidya Naipaul needs no introduction. Seldom are references made to him that do not hold him up as the greatest living writer in the English language today. In fact, in any language today. So I hope you would excuse me if I don't sketch his early career as a writer from the days when he graduated from Oxford and wrote his first novel, The Mystic Monsieur, in 1957. I hope you would also pardon me if I don't point to his stories of conflicts, ruthlessness, cultural as well as personal, in his vast output of work, for which he received the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2001. Perhaps suffice it to simply quote something from the Nobel Committee. In awarding this prize, the committee said, and I quote, "For having united perceptive narrative and incorruptible scrutiny in works that compel us to see the presence of suppressed histories." So ladies and gentlemen, let's simply hear him. Please welcome Sir Vidyadhar Suraj Prasad Naipaul. Thank you.
I have to start. Well, I'm sorry I came so early and interrupted your evening meal and your evening leisure. But I came because I was asked to come. I expected something more formal, I should tell you. I've never addressed something so informal, and I'm trying to rein in my I don't know what word to use, really. Well, yes. Yes. Okay. I had no lecture, and I really have no lecture normally, and so I told people here, when they asked me to come, that I would prefer to read. And I thought I should read something from one of the two books I've written about non-Arab Islam. The first one was written after a journey made in 1979, just after the Iranian Revolution. I went to Iran and then Pakistan, Malaysia, and Indonesia. This was long before the bombs began to be thrown in Java and Bali. I wrote a book then, published in '81, called Among the Believers. And I should say that Harvard gave me a very bad and rotten time about it. I was invited in a strange way to something called the International so-and-so and so-and-so. I didn't know what it was, but it was presented to me as something connected with Harvard University. What I had no idea was that it had a strong Islamic affiliations, and most of the people there, the academics, were defending the Islamic project as it began to appear in 1979. Well, I'm sorry to say that, things like the bombs began to fall in Indonesia and elsewhere. It was all contained in what was happening in '79. And academics who can't see what's coming really do not deserve our respect. 16 years later, I made a second journey because I feel certain subjects are so big, one should look at them in, give them more than a first look. And I went back to the countries I had visited in 1979, 80. And there came to me something very, very clear, which was so obvious that I was amazed that I didn't notice it, that there are two sides to Islam. There's the Arab Islam, the founder nation of Islam. It's an Arab religion. And the converted people who were required by their new faith to honor things Arabian, and are required also to trample on their own past. This is the definition of fundamentalism in the converted countries. And the second book was published in 98, I believe, 98. It was called Beyond Belief, meaning religion is more than belief. Religion is a kind of a cultural overcoming. One of the things I began to understand on the second journey was that there is a great unexamined miracle in the world, and that's the way the old pagan world, from classical times in the West, and later times also in Asia, the way that world became Christian. A revolution occurred. And it was done quite bloodily in the Roman Empire. The Emperor Theodosius, the end of the 4th century, quite simply made it illegal for people to go to the temples. And within 20 years or so, the old pagan religion was wiped out. A current of feeling disappeared and couldn't easily be restored. Because, as was said, for the revealed religions, people are willing to die. But for these more private pagan religions, religions without a prophet and without ideas of heaven and associated ideas, for these old religions, people are not willing to die. People have nothing to go out and fight for. Nobody will go out and die for Venus. Later people might go out and die for the idea of the Virgin Mary, which is a clear successor to the idea of Venus. And then I found on my journey that In this unraveling of the old world outside the Roman Empire in Asia, the world of Buddhism, animism, Hinduism, to use that strange word, people were being given a choice now. And the choice was between the two revealed religions that had come quite later to them, Christianity and Islam, which, oddly enough, arrived at about the same time in the southeast of Asia. And I thought I should read something about people adopting a new religion, a revealed religion. And I thought I should choose Chinese people in Malaya. And I thought, to avoid confrontation, this delicate moment, I should do Chinese people, this reading, adopting Christianity, and they'll try to explain to me. This is one chapter called Old Clothes. It would have been too long for me to read it all. It would have taken about 40 or 45 minutes. And I've made certain excisions, and my reading should last, if I read at my old rate of 130 words a minute. That's the old broadcasting rate. This should take 25 minutes. It's called Old Clothes, and it's set in Malaysia. And it refers at the beginning to the first journey I'd made in 1979, now 25 years ago. In Kuala Lumpur in 1979, I shifted for some days from hotel to hotel before settling in at the Holiday Inn. It was the quietest place I could find, and I liked the setting. To the left was the racecourse, with a view in the distance of the Kuala Lumpur hills. Around the racecourse and in front of the hotel was the rich greenery of the wet tropics, banana fronds, flowering frangipani, the great branching saman or rain tree of Central America, the mingled vegetation of Asia, the Pacific, and the New World that spoke both of the great European explorations and the plantation colonies. It was the very vegetation I had known on the other side of the world in Trinidad. I was born on that island. I lived for the first 18 years there. And then what was familiar became strange. Just across the corner from the Holiday Inn was a little yellow box set in a wall or hedge. I was told it was a Chinese shrine. It had offerings. It might have been used by the Chinese taxi drivers who did hotel work. And the racecourse wasn't really a racecourse. Sometimes I saw horses being trained there in the early mornings, before the sun came up, but I never saw a race. On Saturday and Sunday afternoons, Chinese people, for the most part, came in their cars and filled the grandstand. The racecourse itself, green and sunstruck, with still black shadows, remained empty. Every half hour there was an amplified race commentary, and the grandstand crowd worked itself up to a frenzy, as if at a real race. The races were real, but they were going on somewhere else. The people in the grandstand were looking at television screens, and they had come to the racecourse to do so in a strange mimicry of a day at the races, because it was the only place in Kuala Lumpur where glamping was permitted. Malaysia was racially divided. Malays, Chinese. The government was aggressively Malay and Muslim. Gambling was un-Islamic, and this weekend racecourse excitement was only a humane concession to the Chinese. They were the great gamblers. I had got to know Shafi in 1979, during my first time in Kuala Lumpur. He was a Malay of 32, originally from a village in the still pastoral and poor northeast. Though it could be said that Shafi had done well, had risen in a way his father and grandfather could not have imagined, he was full of rage as a Malay. Shafi and Malays like him felt they had almost lost their country. They thought the Malays had slept for too long in their villages. Things grew too easily in the warm, fertile land. The old life of river and forest was too rich and full. You could throw a seed, Shafi said one day, and it would grow. You could put a bare hook in the water and catch a fish. Used to that idea of the land, the village people hadn't seen or understood to what extent in the last 100 years they had been supplanted by Chinese and others. They had awakened now, late in the century, to find that Malays had become only half the population, and that a new way of life had developed all around them. They were not prepared for that new way. To be a Malay like Shafi, half in and half out of the old ways, was to feel every kind of fear and frustration. It was too much for a man to bear on his own. And in 1979, Islam was being made to carry that general rage. Malays of Shafi's generation had become passionate believers, and their belief was given edge by Islamic missionaries, who were especially busy in 1979 with the revolution in Iran and the Islamizing terror of General Zia in Pakistan. The missionaries were spreading stories of Islamic success in those countries, and promising similar success to people elsewhere, if only they believed. The Islamic missionary world existed in its own bubble. The extension of the faith was its principal aim, and as for the 14th century traveler Ibn Battuta, once the faith ruled, the conditions of the faithful didn't matter. It was at the Holiday Inn that Shafi used to come to see me. He wasn't an easy guest. He said he didn't like places like the Holiday Inn, and he didn't hide his worry about the food. It might have been prepared by non-Muslims, by Chinese, or by Indians. There were other things that would have offended him. The modest little bar, where at night the group called the Old Timers, city Malays with an Indian or two, sang pop songs. And then there was the lunchtime fashion show on Friday, the Sabbath, when people came to see the Indian and Chinese girls seesaw their shoulders and do their walk in the rather stale, shut-in restaurant air and the very small Holiday Inn pool below the coffee shop windows, where white women exposed themselves in swimsuits. But Shafi had stopped seeing, perhaps had never seen, what he rejected. He couldn't even tell, for instance, as I found one day when I asked him, whether the sunbathing women at the poolside were attractive. When he had first come to Kuala Lumpur as a schoolboy, he had been nervous. He had felt a stranger. Now he held himself aloof from it and was strong in his self-righteousness. His ideas were sometimes confused. His Islam was being made to carry too many things. There was purity in his village in Kota Baru, for instance, purity in the life he had known there, which he had now lost. Yet he wished to be like a scourge in those villages, to convert them fully, to cleanse them of what had survived of old Hindu customs. That had become part of his cause. The missionary Islam he now fed off had given him an impossible dream of Islamic purity. Out of this purity there was going to come power, and accounts would be settled with the world. 16 years later, the Holiday Inn was surrounded by towers of concrete and steel. Land was precious here. The racecourse view I had known could not now be reconstructed. It was half mythical, like the Roman hills before the building of Rome. And all over Kuala Lumpur, there was much more building to come. At the back of the hotel where I was staying, an immense hole was being dug across the road. The hole had the area of a large city block. It dwarfed men and machines. Ramps led down from level to level, from red earth to dry pale earth. The composite tropical greenery of colonial days was overshadowed now by an international style in steel and glass and stone and concrete and marble, and the very climate seemed to have altered. Air conditioning made the big buildings cold. The weather outside was always a little surprise. It was pleasant for the visitor to play with these temperature shifts. In 1979, Malaysia had been rich. Now it was extraordinarily rich. I wondered about the effect on Shafi. I knew that before he'd begun to work full-time for the Muslim youth movement, he had worked as the managing director of a Malay construction company. He was very young for the job, but there were not many business-minded Malays at the time. The firm hadn't done well. There were big players in the construction business in Malaysia, and then Shafi had set up on his own. He'd failed. He thought this was because his Chinese workers and almost everybody else had let him down. The failure grieved him, I knew. It had got mixed up with his religious ideas. And I wondered whether, with the great new wealth of the country and all the encouragement the government had been giving to Malays to go into business, Shafi hadn't been tempted to try again. He would now be 48, in middle life. His career, whatever it was, would have been more or less worked out. But I couldn't find out about Shafi. The people who had known him in the old days had lost touch with him. He was a preacher, I was told. He was on the move. He wasn't easy to reach. And then one morning, I was taken to an Islamic commune on the outskirts of Kuala Lumpur to meet a man who said he was Shafi and said he remembered me. The commune was a solid settlement of two-storied concrete houses. The houses were painted and the roads were paved and there were gardens and cars. Whatever the commune people might say about their self-denying way of life, they were part of rich Kuala Lumpur. We had to look for the house of the man who said he was Shafi. When we found it, I found I didn't know the man. He pretended for a little, but only for a little, and only in a half-hearted way, that he remembered me. He was in his 40s and he looked happy and idle, enjoying the commune life. His house on 2 floors had a big, open, well-furnished hall downstairs, and he was playing there in the middle of the morning with a kind of village serenity, with a sleepy-eyed, unsteady young child of his. It was a form of display. In this kind of commune, simple things could be paraded as religious or virtuous act that gave especial pleasure to the believer as reward. He said in a mechanical way that the big highway the government had built was wrong. It was opening up the country to vice. He said that the official language of the country should be Arabic. English was not the language of Muslims. But he had said these things so many times before that now he was on the floor and trying to get the child to play with one of its many toys. Now he was speaking by rote, without energy. I felt it was out of pure idleness that he had said he was Shafi. He wanted only to get attention. There was no point in being fundamentalist and dangerous and living in a commune if no one noticed. And in fact, Shafi, whom in the end I never met, because no one among his former associates particularly wanted me to meet him, Shafi had become like that idle man in their eyes. Once he had been at the center of the Muslim youth movement in Malaysia, the movement using Islam to wake up the Malays. He had no other career. Now, though he'd remained true to those early beliefs, he was on the outside. It embarrassed people to be reminded of him. He was a man who'd taken the idea of the religious life to extremes. And other ideas had changed. In 1979, Shafi, grieving for the village of his childhood, had spoken of Malays as a pastoral, tropical people. Once he said they were a timeless people. He meant only they had little sense of time. They were not commercially minded. They were without the energy of the Chinese, who came from a four-seasoned country. he'd worked these ideas, which were curiously colonial ones, into his overall religious view. They were not ideas that Malays liked now. A young lawyer said, that's been laid aside, destroyed almost. It's been replaced by the idea of the Malays as a trading and manufacturing and innovative people. These are all words you would not have associated with Malays in the past. The government had done all that it could to bring Malays into business, and over the last 2 generations, it had succeeded. The racial anxieties of 16 years before had been swamped by the great new wealth, and new men had been created on both sides. That was the message of the steel and concrete and glass around the site of the Holiday Inn, and the great highway through the forest that had opened up the villages and opened up new land. A journey to the interior that in the old days took 6 to 8 hours along old roads that touched many of the old colonial towns and settlements now took 2.5 hours and showed almost nothing of that past. The lawyer said, I think it telescopes time. In 1979, they had all been rather young in the Muslim youth movement. The leader, Anwar Ibrahim, the man on whom they all leaned, the man who gave them confidence, was only 32, Shafi's age. Nasser, to whom Shafi had introduced me, was only 25 at that time. He was very much the junior, and physically he was even slighter than Shafi. He'd just come back from Bradford in England, where he'd been doing a diploma in international relations. He hadn't liked the free and easy sexual ways of England, and he didn't want those ways to infect young Malays over there. Nasser had an ancestor who was a Malay sheikh in Mecca. A sheikh was a guide, and this sheikh guided Malays who had gone to Mecca on the pilgrimage. This kind of guiding would have become a proper paying occupation only after the 1830s, when steam replaced sail, and the journey from Malaysia became quicker and more reliable. And it is possible that Nasser's ancestor was doing this pilgrim work in the second half of the 19th century. Towards the end of the 19th century, as I work it out, this ancestor returned to Malaysia, to a tin town, predominantly Chinese, 20 kilometers or so to the north of Kuala Lumpur. This man's son was Nasser's great-grandfather. He married when he was 12. In 1934, when he was very old, he set up a Malay language newspaper that preached self-help to the Malays. He was a voice in the wilderness. After him, the family declined. The tradition of learning faded away. There was little money in teaching. There was more in farming. Nasser's grandfather, who should have been a religious teacher, became a rice farmer with 7 acres. Nasser's father worked as a ranger in the forestry department. He had only the standard primary school education, up to the 6th class, but he read the newspaper every morning before he went to work. This newspaper reading was important. It was Nasser's great intellectual stimulus as a child. Nasser was one of 7 sons and the 4th of 8 children. When he was 8, he began to read the newspaper like his father. It was an advanced thing for a Malay child to do. In time then, Nasser, the ranger's son, was able to go to Bradford to do a diploma in international relations. And now, 16 years later, only 41, he was running a holding company that managed the diverse affairs of 8 companies. Nasser had a suite of offices in a skyscraper. The shadow of this skyscraper fell on the green-glassed skyscraper across the road. This made the road seem narrower, and the mid-afternoon tropical light, which would have been both harsh and stinging in open fields and open streets, was softened in that narrow protected space, so that the light and climate of Kuala Lumpur seemed perfect. Nasser, with glasses now, and less frail-looking than in 1979, was dressed with an executive's care. Belted trousers, tan shoes, matching socks, stylish wide tie, a large round watch on his slender wrist. His personal assistant was a tall and gentle young Sikh. In the main waiting room, and in the antechambers of various offices were models, like toys, of white aeroplanes on silver sticks. NASA's holding company had interest in aviation. They ran scheduled domestic air services. It was an extraordinary transformation, and the man himself was welcoming and gracious, full of offers of help. It was as if good village ways had been given a kind of corporate enlargement. I had been moved in 1979 by the openness of the young men of the movement. They didn't hide things or make up things about themselves. NASA seemed to have that kind of openness still. He remembered what he had been in 1979. He didn't put a gloss on it, and he talked without prompting of the internal demons, the phobias, the lack of confidence that as a small-town Malay he'd had to quieten before he could be what I now saw. What they had been looking to religion to do for them in 1979, simple power, simple authority, religion had done for them later. Kuala Lumpur was fabulous for the visitor. So rich, so new and glossy, so full of new public buildings and splendid new interiors, so full of energy. There was a new bank in a new building. It had been created by two Chinese brothers. They were only in their 40s, and their beginnings had been quite simple. So far as vision went, one brother was all sparks, a talker. When he talked, his face became flushed. The other brother was calmer, with glasses, a listener, with the manner of a physician. Yet I felt that when the time came, the calm brother would be the more daring. They made great projects appear very simple, a matter only of logic. For both of them, money had ceased to be simply money. Business had become more an expression of energy, and vital for that reason. It was Philip who introduced me to the brothers. Philip was the secretary of their company. He was Chinese too, and as young as the men he worked for. Philip was easy of manner, humorous, quick, immensely attractive. There seemed to be an unusual depth to him, and I was to find that his serenity, which was part of his attractiveness, was something he'd had to work for. It overlay great childhood unhappiness. Philip's father had two families. Philip belonged to the second family, and he felt that his mother had been badly treated. He didn't like what he'd seen as a child. He wished to put matters right for his mother, but he was adrift emotionally until his conversion to Christianity in his 15th year. It happened at his school. It was a mission school run by the Plymouth Brethren, who had been in Malaysia for about 90 years. He was at a very low point when one day, quite by chance, he went to a chapel service. He was dazzled by the teaching that God was a loving Father. He felt it gave him a place in the world. Philip said, "It's ironical, because I would have thought I would have rebelled against that kind of religion, coming as I did from a broken family, where I didn't have a father since age 8. And the direct teaching about grace in the parable of the prodigal son, where the father waits and hugs and kisses the returning son. Grace, unmerited love and favor bestowed upon an undeserving person. It was something very powerful. Philip said, "I owe a lot to the faith. It gave me a certainty and belongingness, identity. It had all been confused. Who am I? Chinese, but not Chinese. It's a Chinese cultural program. In a Chinese cultural program, I would be lost. English, but not English. I've never been to England." The scriptures gave the original impetus to my love and passion for reading, which exists at this day. At that time, 1966 and 67, Islam was not the proselytizing force it now was. It was only one religion among others. At the time of his conversion, Philip was thinking more of his future. He wanted very much to be a lawyer, a professional man. I remember my mother saying to me, "It's so hard to deal with lawyers." I thought one day I'll be a lawyer and give the time of day to my clients. I wanted to compensate for the family's shortcomings. My father's first family had become doctors, or had doctors. The second family, to which I belonged, hadn't done well at all. So I wanted to vindicate, to win back face for my mother. She was a worshipper of Chinese idols. People like her had now moved to a new form of Japanese Buddhism. It's quite common, Philip said, the Chinese family throwing away their gods and joining this new Japanese Buddhism, which is based on strong humanistic traditions. I'm happy for them that they've liberated themselves from those kitchen gods. People who knew about his faith and his intellectual inclinations wondered how he could work in a bank. He told them, "My understanding of Christianity is that we don't deny the world. We are in the world, but not of the world." His mother's honoring of the kitchen gods was mainly a matter of habit. She would light joss sticks to them and place offerings for them. It was part of the routine of her day. Philip said, "Even as a child, it had no meaning for me. When the time came to discard it, we just got rid of it like old clothes. We weren't worried that the gods would come and punish us." When I was 14 or 15, I felt a lack, a void, an emptiness. It cannot be articulated. For me, it was serendipitous that I chanced upon a chapel service. The second generation of Chinese had to anguish over the fact, who am I beyond my shelter, my diploma, my degree? These questions are more real to the second generation. The first generation is much too busy. For the Chinese, there is inherited wealth, inherited circumstances, but also the query, am I only my father's son? That's the end of the reading.
Thank you, Sir Vidya. Sir Vidya Naipaul has received some pre-written questions, and we'll go through some of those questions. At the same time, I understand that Sir Vidya will take questions from the floor, time permitting. So if I have Sir Vidya's permission, may I read the first question? Sir Vidya, the question is, what are your views on the separation of church and state, both politically and legally, in the context of Islam?
Well, it can't be separated. It isn't like that. I mean, the people you meet will tell you that it's all one, and you can't ever divide one from the other. So the idea doesn't arise.
Shall we proceed to the next question, Sir Vidya?
I think we should, yes.
This questioner asks, I'm tempted to ask Sir Vidya, why don't you take questions from the floor? I guess it was the case before, it is not the case now, but this inquirer wonders if why.
I'll tell you, the other day I was in Delhi, and I received a very long invitation from someone very charming to go to an institute of technology, very high-powered, very well thought of, universally. And I went there, and the introduction took about 20 minutes. The professor who was making the introduction, I think, had written a paper which she wanted to announce to the audience. And that was not all. There was her husband in the audience. And he stood up at some stage, and he was about to read a poem he'd written to get one's opinion. He wanted to publish the poem in this rather old-fashioned classical world where you read it and the world hears. So that is why one shouldn't take questions from the floor at random. People people have all kinds of bees in their bonnets, you know.
So please don't read poems.
Please don't read poems.
Mr. Naipaul says, you recently supported publicly the Indian Hindu nationalists. Could you kindly give us the reasoning behind this?
I didn't support them. You know, they asked me to come and see them, and I said, yes, I'd like to come and hear what you think about various things. And it was a private meeting, and I was mainly listening to what they had to tell me. And this came out in a strange way, as it has come out, that I supported them electorally and everything else. I actually am very interested in them as a movement. I'm interested in all movements that come from the earth for people, especially people who are finding their feet in the world. You read what I've read, you'll see that I'm interested in the Malays finding their own, using religion in a rather, well, I think, bad way. And you've heard about the Chinese young man who, using religion again, I think, in a slightly better way to find his place in the world. And I think a place like, actually one shouldn't be talking about this outside India, because this has to do with the history of India. India has had an appalling history for 1,000 years. And when the history is so long and so bad, the movement of regeneration begins at the bottom. And I'm very interested in it. And it cannot mean anything to people here as much as it means to people in India. So I prefer not to talk about it at any length.
Thank you, Sir. Will Iran, Tehran, be the pivotal point for Muslim-Christian reconciliation, or is Cyprus a better example?
I think this idea of reconciliation is a joke, actually. I don't think it's possible. I think these revealed religions have ideas of world conquest. They're proselytizing religions. And Islam certainly, especially with Saudi Arabian money, which is now free to be spent on these ventures after the collapse of the Soviet threat, Islam is aiming at nothing less than world conquest, world domination. And we had some trouble with people in England the other day, and the boys were holding up a placard, Islam will dominate the world. You know, these are simple boys who can hardly read, but this is what they've been told. So I think this idea of people coming together quietly and nicely and thinking we all believe in God, etc., and let's be friends, I think this is a fantasy. It's very hard to face it that you are in the middle of a religious war, but you have to face it, and you have to find ways of dealing with it.
In light of more recent events, and with the power of hindsight, would you want to alter any of the critical assessments contained in your very interesting book, Beyond Belief, Islamic Excursions Among the Converted? If yes, what would they be and why?
Well, you see, I don't think that question comes from someone who's actually looked at the book. It's a very academic question. You read the title and you feel you know what's being said. You've heard part of that book, and I think you will understand it's about people. I'm letting people have a say in order to understand them. So it's the book really is not critical in that way. The book makes some observations in the beginning about the imperial nature of Islam, and I think this also has to be understood, and it's contained in my answer to the earlier answer.
How do you assess the state of the Muslim community in India, especially at a time when a certain fundamentalism is creeping into the Hindu religion? Can there be dialogues towards a culture of peace in the country, and how can the Hindu political party in power contribute towards this?
Well, the word fundamentalism means going back to fundamentals. And you have fundamentals if you're Christian. There are certain fundamentals. And certainly you have a set of laws if you are Muslim. That's what fundamentalism means. And among the converted people, fundamentalism means doing what Shafi was doing in Malaya, stamping on the bits of himself that still reminded him of his pre-Muslim past, pre-Islamic past. So the word is wrong. It is appearing to equate two entirely different things. I said earlier what I think this party is doing after 1,000 years of history. I think it's trying to awaken people to an idea of the past. That's quite different from asserting religious purity. It's quite different, quite different. And I think it's, I think, Nadra, you know, you would feel better about the Muslims in India. What do you think? Tell me.
What do I think?
Yes.
Well, it's a very wide subject, you know. I mean, when you say what do I think about the let's define the whole thing. Well,
Should we leave it to?
no, it's not taking it over. It's such a wide thing. It's so personal to me. I am a Muslim, and it's not something I can just talk about unless somebody asks me something very specific. That what would you like to? I mean, give me something specific about the plight of the Muslims. Well, the Muslims are very regressive in India, and there are many reasons for their regression. They're predominantly illiterate, and because they're illiterate, they're in the hands of the madrasas, and the madrasas have been working in India since the early 80s. A lot of money for the madrasas comes from Saudi Arabia, and now these are not people like you and me. These are people whose minds have gone. They are blank. There is no tolerance. So it's a very serious question of what the Muslim situation in India is, and Pakistan. Since I am a journalist and I have worked with the madrasas in Pakistan, for me it's a very painful and a very frightening question. It's not something that I can speak for hours on it. So I will be very brief that the situation is very, very worrying for the Indian Muslim, but it's self-created to a certain extent. What else can I say?
Well, I think the question is saying what future for them, and
What future?
I think there is some idea there that a secular state.
No, the question is, this is what I said to the Indian Prime Minister and Mr. Advani, this is why we went to the BJP office, is that why are the Muslims not being brought into the mainstream? You can only do that in India if you get rid of the Muslim personal law. I'm sure you all know that there are two laws in India. One law is for the Indians and the other for the Muslims is under the Muslim Islamic law. Now when you have two parallel laws, you cannot have a minority like the Muslims being absorbed into the mainstream. In the 83s, there was a very strong case called the Shah Bano case. This was a case of a woman, an Indian woman who had been married for about 30 years, and her husband one day decided to kick her out. And so she went to court and for alimony. And so we were waiting. Now this was the Congress government. We were waiting to see what does India do, and will they change the law? This is a golden opportunity. But it was a Congress government, and at that point they went with the political pressure. Again, it was political expediency that they decided in favor of the Muslim law. And this woman was just left with nothing. And it took a lot of work that Muslim women had been doing in India and in Pakistan. It took us back 20 years, this very legal decision of the Indian High Court. So this is the plight of the Muslims. They are a regressive, strong minority. who are used for votes. And unless you address this issue, unless you bring them into the mainstream, unless you stop money coming into the madrasas, and the money is coming from Saudi Arabia, you stop that, you will have some way towards not having communal riots in India. I'm sorry. It's a very strong. I'm really sorry.
Yes, yes. Illandra has a lot of...
I'm sorry, I'm very passionate about it because I have been through riots. I have seen what happens to women. I have seen what happens to when Islam is used. I have lived under Mr. Bhutto. No thanks to Mr. Bhutto who took us to hell, and Mr. Zia. So I'm very sorry if I sounded, it was totally, I was taken aback. It's not my day.
I noticed in the crowd there's already stirrings going on.
The thing about a secular ideal is that, if it takes two to tango, it takes two to create a secular ideal. So people have got to move one to the other. The movement hasn't got to be only from one side. But if you have a fundamentalist cast of mind which says ancient laws cannot be broken, we must we must live according to the old ways, it becomes very, very hard. And again, it's not easy to deal with it, except by being quite brutal.
We will take 2 or 3 questions from the floor. Are there any questions? I know. Big deal, baby. Any other questions?
Yeah. Can we move to the next question, please? And can we be brief? Thank you.
Yes.
I actually don't know. I hope the Americans keep their nerve, but I don't think they will. I would like them to stay there as an occupying force for a good long time, couple of generations, to re-educate the people. I hope that can be done. America's got a very good history of occupying and re-educating people in the Philippines and elsewhere, so I hope they do it now. But I think they'll be forced out by very simple ideas about, well, democracy, which is not an Arab idea. The Arabs are not interested in democracy. But I don't know what will happen. I don't know. I'm just expressing what I hope will happen.
Next question, maybe. Oh.
Anyone else? It's a press club.
Yes. Earlier there were a lot of clamors that against questions not being allowed on the floor, but I see there's none. Okay. Yeah.
May I ask a possibly naive question, or certainly naive question? Here you're talking about the secularization of meeting two sides in this case.
Yes.
Hindu and Muslim.
Yes.
But speaking more generally, you talked about Christians, Muslims, etc. There's many varieties of these. They all seem to be looking for comfort on some hands, and on other hands, we're looking for control. And where it seems to become dangerous for everybody, including themselves, is when they're particularly disadvantaged, when they feel that they've lost control. And I would suggest, partly from reading your own books, and partly from your own experience, I think that typically these people have less capacity to deal with ambiguity. I suppose my question is, do you see any hope for a universalizable approach to contentment and control other than consumerism, which is basically a drug? Sorry. Oh, no. Not again.
Can you please the microphone here?
I'm sorry.
Can you possibly kindly use the microphone there?
Yeah, but they'll probably all come out differently this time.
Okay, maybe good.
Use this. Take this.
I think we.
Sorry, yeah. Well, partly I was referring to Sir Vidya's own books, and partly to all of our experience, I think, that religions, whether they're Christian or whatever they happen to be, are, on one hand, some people need control, other people need contentment. Whatever they need, where they become dangerous, I think, politically and socially, is where people are particularly disadvantaged. They feel they have no control. The reactions are either total apathy or else violence, basically, I think. What I was asking Sir Vidya was, did he see any grounds for optimism about a universalizable formula, a secularization, if you like, a meeting of all of these different kinds of fundamentalisms and returns to histories, etc., but one that isn't consumerism. I mean, that tends to be the great secularizing force. If you give enough money and game machines to people, they tend to stop fighting for a while. But it's only a temporary expedient, I think. Anyway, sorry, I'm talking too much. I was meaning to ask you, Sir Vidya, if you had any optimism about another kind of attitude emerging, or is
I don't think we want a too peaceful world.
Okay.
I think we need to have these various ideas fighting one another. It creates a nice tension, and it's a very creative tension for us. And I don't understand this thing you're talking about, consumerism. What is consumerism? Please tell me.
Well, in my experience, and I could be wrong, is that if you have, let's say, a traditional society, some of the ones that you've described, that where the individuals in those societies are feeling their lives are fragmenting, they're losing touch with their own roots, or they have problems establishing meaning. If you then provide the opportunity for material acquisition, if you spread the rumor of easy money and easy cars and televisions and fast food, etc., 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 it tends to diffuse those feelings of anger, those needs to control.
No, but it's worked the other way in recent history, hasn't it?
Well, that's
people who've got money
Yes.
have begun the fundamentalist rage, and they've begun these religious revolutions.
That much is true, yes. But, sorry, but what I was saying, do you see any other way, or do you, in fact,
No, I
prefer?
don't see any other way. I don't think it's particularly desirable.
Okay.
The idea of a universal world without any tensions, I don't think it'll be a dead world. I like tension in the world.
If I may just ask one more question. I agree with you in principle, but it seems that we're facing some rather unusually, at least historically unusually, dangerous outcomes at the moment. Maybe not. Maybe in the...
I don't think we are. I think we mustn't exaggerate the current situation. We mustn't believe the newspapers too completely. You know, that the world is taken up all the time with these ideas. I think if there are many other forces at play now in the world. One is this great, there's science. There is this great movement from the earth in certain countries that wish to understand their history. This is a new thing in the world. And all these things are possibly hopeful things. But one mustn't look for easy ideas to feel comfortable, certain situations are rather awful.
Well, thank you.
I think he was there before.
Weren't you there yesterday?
But you've asked your question. Why do you want to come and ask me again? You asked two questions yesterday, at the beginning and at the end of question time. Now you come here and you want to ask the third question.
And you're a journalist, are you? No. All right.
My question is, because of the nature of the turn up to ask a question over here. Here.
I think we should
So we're going.
put an end to it. We should put an end to it.
Because of the nature of the content of many of your books, some critics and some reviewers and some readers have often chastised you as catering predominantly to a Western audience. How do you respond to a Western audience
Yes.
that portrays third world countries in a demeaning and negative manner?
Yes.
I'm just wondering what your views are on
Well,
that.
you know, I think perhaps you haven't been at this meeting we are now attending, because you heard me talking about the Indian situation. That is, I'm accused of doing something else for one of the largest countries in the world, not certainly a Western country. I think it's an idle question, actually.
It's an idle question,
Yes.
but people do say this about my husband. But I also want to say that critics who do criticize my husband did not risk their lives and go out to Africa 20 years ago and then predict what was going to happen to Africa, which has now come true. So I think they should read his books.
Thank you very much.